Charles, question for you. How much do you know about lobsters?
Not much.
Do you like eating lobsters?
No, I don't. I'm not a big fan.
Did you know that the title of today's discussion is Great Franchise Brands and Great Franchisees or Lobsters?
Is this like a Jordan Peterson?
You were the second person to say that today. That's interesting. We're going to get into it just a second. Full clarity and transparency for those watching. It's lobsters, not mobsters. This is not about the franchise mafia. We're not talking about them today. We're talking about lobsters. All right, Charles, here it goes. A lobster. And the reason why I'm going to use this analogy, and then we're going to talk through what this feels like. And I think it's going to connect well with you as well. It's going to relate to you and what goes on in your business, and it relates to me and what goes in mine. A lobster is just a slimy sea creature. And what it does is it grows its shell. The problem with shells is they don't grow. They can't expand. And so a lobster builds a shell, but a lobster does not stop growing. It continues to grow. And so it grows and grows and grows, and then it becomes super uncomfortable because the shell is smaller than where it's growing to. So it's uncomfortable in the shell. So the lobster has two options. Well, a few options at this point. It can go into one of those little crates and be caught by a fisherman and say, I'm done. I know what happens next. Put me in the boiling water. Or it figures out a way to now continue to grow. So it hits this uncomfortable mark and it swims down to the bottom of the ocean. It finds a rock. It goes underneath the rock and it sheds its shell. And then it starts to populate a new shell. It grows its new shell and it goes back out to the ocean and continues to eat and eat and eat and grow and grow and grow until, again, it gets to a place where it's super uncomfortable and it has to make a decision. Do I quit? Or do I continue to figure out a way to adapt? And the smart lobsters, they continue to adapt and they go back down to the ocean floor. They find that rock. They shed the shell. They grow again, another shell, and the cycle continues over and over and over again. And so if you think of that as a scenario, as it relates back to being uncomfortable as a franchisor or in business in general, or the stresses that come along with some of the turbulence that you might see in your business, great franchisors, great franchisees, great franchise suppliers are lobsters. They're going to hit these moments in the history of their business where it's going to get super uncomfortable. Either they've grown too much into where they're at today, or they're just in an uncomfortable state of business where it takes a really, really hard look and says, I'm going to go start over. I'm going to get rid of this shell and start over. So in business, sometimes that's you have your team that can get you to this level, and then you have to shed the shell of your team to build another team to take you to the next level. As a franchisor, it could be, here's the way that you do things from a technology standpoint or support standpoint, and you have to now shed that shell and say, it's okay, we can take a few steps backwards. We're going to get rid of what protects us from the sea. We're going to get rid of that and take a swing to try to get better. And so I heard that and I thought about it and I was like, that is a great example of what we have to do in franchising in every form of business if you want to continue to climb to the top. And the last thing I'll say, and then take over on your opinions. Unfortunately, and this is all business, but very unfortunately in franchising, we are trained. Our brains are trained that if we're not growing, we're dying. And so it's we don't stop and celebrate the small wins. We don't celebrate when we sold a franchise. We have to go get the next one. And because of that, it's really hard to respect the journey. There are a few brands that do, and probably that mentality is the brands that get over 100 units and keep going. But majority of them really struggle on this because you're not stopping and smelling the roses, or whatever saying needs to be said. And so when you're thinking about this journey, I think it's okay to slide backwards to continue to grow. And that's where the best businesses, in my opinion, end up being Lobsters. Thoughts?
First thought, which I won't divert us right now, but which was, how'd you come up with that analogy? Because actually really good. And what stands out is that for all entrepreneurs, it's that vulnerable moment or period of time where your business is being challenged, you're facing economic stress, sort of the moment where, I don't know, the process where lobster molts or is now taking cover as it builds a new shell, right? That vulnerability is what every entrepreneur, franchisor, they remember those moments, right? And years later, when they're reflecting on success, they talk about that moment where things weren't so good and there were, threats and they were vulnerable. So I think we all face it. I think the biggest challenge, and I'd put myself in this category too, there's times as business owners and for franchisors where you've outgrown the shell, but you don't realize it. And you think the pain or the lack of mobility or whatever comes with that is normal. And I guess the real threat is accepting, the status quo and not recognizing that you have problems or you have growing pains and you have weaknesses in your systems and then you're blind to it, right? So I think that analogy hits on like 10 different levels. Question is,
One of my favorite restaurants in in Atlanta is called New York Prime, and they have Big Red. I'll show this on the screen. So Big Red is their largest lobster. Like, it's around the restaurant on a radio flyer, and it's for display. Like, it's a part of their shtick. And so you think of how do you even become Big Red? Big Red had to go through that process. I don't know how many times you shed on a year. I should look that up as a next data point. But Big Red had to shed its shell multiple times. And so in business, we think of these pause moments as failing. We're like, you're almost self-critical on yourself if you take a step backwards. But the pause moments for a lobster ends up making it so Big Red is on display at a steakhouse, ready to be enjoyed by some gentlemen who are ready to eat a big ass lobster. But call that the definition of winning. Big Red won. He is a celebrity in the human world. But to those that don't get to that level, it's because of the fear of taking that step backwards. And look, I will say in my business right now, and I've talked a little bit about this on FRANX. I like to be honest and truthful. There are those that if I go up to them at a conference, say, "How are things going?" They're like, "Oh, it's going fantastic." So it's always great. Look, when we made the decision during COVID to go into 23 different states from a hiring standpoint, the purpose, I thought I still would reflect backwards on it and say was a good idea. The idea was, let's take down the borders, let's hire where talent is, which opens up a wider pool of individuals that we can hire from. What I wasn't able to see in that moment is how would that affect culture as we continued to expand and grow. And so us as a lobster, we took off the borders. That was us shedding the shell, and we went and hired. But culturally, we weren't prepared for that next dip and how we were going to go forward, because now all the coffee talk was eliminated from our process, and some of those quick brainstorms was hurting things internally. We could still deliver the work, but we're going to hit this snag point where we had to start thinking about, like, how do you rebuild this culture? And so right now with me in Atlanta, we're going through the process of examining how do we build up a larger pocket here as a core, and then we can have sub pockets in some of these other states. But we're going through it now. Like we are behind. We have decided to go under that rock. We know we're a lobster. We know we have these massive claws. But we're going under the rock. We're pushing reset on some of our things, and we're going to come out and we're going to keep growing until we're uncomfortable again, and then we'll address it again. So I share that as a vulnerable statement that I think when you can be vulnerable in business and recognize that it's time to make that next step, that's not a negative. It's actually it's something that is brave and honorable for a franchisor, to go through that discovery and say, I'm willing to take a little bit of a pause, not off, a pause in my process to recalibrate so that I can get to that next level.
Yeah, I mean that's packed with so many thoughts there. And it's an obvious point. I guess the key is when do you know, right? That it is time to pause and shed and why do so many businesses, which I'm not saying I'm excluded, I don't know. Um, Even what does that mean, right? Because I could think I'm pausing and we're building this new shell, and I may just be growing underneath the same old shell and think I'm doing things differently. So I think it becomes difficult for leadership teams to really understand when they've outgrown what's working for them. I mean, and we're facing that challenge too. Our strength is for sure team, but on the other hand, you don't have enough of it, so you always want to keep building team. On the other, I have disruption in our product slash service, right? Legal industry disruption, um, non-lawyer providers doing whatever, proper or not, I don't know. Um, and but yet, I think my biggest weakness, I'm stuck in the same mindset of we're a law firm and this is what we do. Sure, there's a innovation, but it's innovation relative to other law firms, not innovation relative to other organizations, consulting companies outside of the legal industry. And I think for me, I think that's always been a place of safety, and that's where we've outgrown, and that's something I've missed from a vulnerability standpoint.
I'm not going to claim to be an expert in this answer, but your question was, how do you know that it's
Yeah,
time to go under the rock and rebuild your shell? I'm going to answer this in two ways. The melting pot. One of the cool things of their corporate headquarters that I admire is they put a swing that hangs from the ceiling in their office. And as their CEO is walking us around and giving us the tour, he said, "This is a swing," clearly. Uh, and he said, "The reason we put this in here is because you cannot go on a swing and not have a memory from your childhood." He's like, when you can go back and re-access the inner child, your creativity increases significantly. And so that sticks with me in this corner. And so I go back to this. I talked with a guy on our podcast the other day, franchisee, and he talked about Peter Pan syndrome. He's like, I have been a kid. I want to keep going back to being a kid. That's in bucket one, and bucket two is fun. Life is going to throw a lot of obstacles at everybody. Business is going to throw a lot of obstacles at everybody. And so if you can somehow access that inner child and hold on to as simple as the core value is of fun, that turns into your indicator of when it's time to recalibrate. And so I think about you and I, anybody that has seen us in action, whether that's the water monster or it's you throwing my luggage down the subway in New York, like those are both childish activities, but it made us laugh, it made us have fun, and we cannot point back to those moments and not laugh about it and actually enjoy a memory. And so I say that because I think that's the point of recalibration, when all of a sudden you're looking around, and it's not going to be perfect, but let's say it's 80-20 rule. If less than 80% of the time you're not enjoying this moment in life, then it's time to recalibrate.
for sure. And then I guess for franchisors, Look, you also don't want to be happy 80% of the time, but not hitting KPIs and numbers, right? But again, who would be happy if you're not hitting KPIs and numbers? Y- I'm in more fear of not hitting our KPIs and numbers of disappointing our team than I am in terms of the financial impact or not on me. Um, so take what you've just said, because I think everyone just loses sight of that. I know I do, and I'm glad we're is is that joy from what you're doing, and then to connect it to those KPIs and those numbers, and then let those factors, qualitative and quantitative, decide when you need to pause and build that bigger, stronger shell. um, and I agree about those milestones, and really appreciating those victories along the way, because I forget them so fast. Not that I don't appreciate them. I beat myself up nonstop over this stuff. Like, hey, you know, about, I won't say not being successful. That's not true, but slight disappointment in not having achieved certain things. And it's true. It goes on in my head. It's crazy. So, um, I think that's a good look. I think there's a good factors, the happiness, and I think you need to add the qualitative, right? And then for franchisors, and I mean, we're all just talking in terms of entrepreneurship. When you think of it just in those simple terms that you phrased them in, like everything kind of gets simple, right? You've now I this will wear off. 10 minutes from now I'll be confused again. But like I feel like I want to go just plan on, look, last night, I know I'm babbling. I actually had enjoyed. I was sitting outside. I was on our firm website. I was emailing clients. I was actually enjoying myself. If that sounds so pathetic, but I got a thank you back right away. It was like I felt like we were building something productive, and I guess that gets to it also. If your team is, if you can't look back and say, our team, our product, our service, our franchise is the best for this particular client, and we make their lives better, and in turn they appreciate our teams, and it's a win-win situation, well, then you're not going to be happy. And that's a signal that you really need to create a better product or service and work harder on it. And I think that's where you find the joy, is on the other side of that.
I mean, there's a lot of comments that could come out of this, and I think we'd probably talk about it for hours. If I'm trying to relate this back to a franchisee or a franchisor, or like, I'll take a franchisee I was talking with the other day, single unit operator. Asked him about scale. He's like, I'm going to continue to just own my market. He's like, I'm not even worried about unit two. I was like, that's a smart dude. Like, he's not, like, he's growing fatter, not taller, and he's happy about it. He's happy about that journey. I still think, like, for a franchisor, this moment of happiness, if it dwindles, that's the time that you go back and you rebuild your lobster shell. Because at the end of the day, nobody cares about the business that you created when you go on your deathbed. Like, people don't talk about Steve Jobs and what he built at Apple. They talk about Steve Jobs and the visions that he had. And so, like, you think about, like, legacy and what we're remembered for, those stressful moments, if it causes you to be an asshole, that's bad too. And if that asshole factor hits down to your franchisees, that's going to cost you money. If that asshole factor hits down and hits your employees, that's going to cost you money. So it's like I think we're conditioned that money is the definition of success in life, but it really isn't. It's bigger than that. Lobster can't make money. Lobster just wants to get to New York Prime so it can be eaten by a table of 20.
I don't think he wants to get there. Um, yeah, look, in connecting all the dots, for sure, no one remembers you for the business you created, but they do for the people, your team members, how you've influenced their lives, and but I agree. There should be only good things that come from it. And I got to imagine all the really special brands and all the special businesses. I think their leadership looks at it that way. I mean, I have a good friend passed away, and he built a beautiful business, but he was always a kind person, a polite person, would say thank you to a fault. Team loved him, people. And you know what? At his funeral, one of the things that got me the most was seeing their trade show display in the funeral home because he cared about his business. But again, it's not the business. The business would be meaningless if it weren't for the person that, touched those lives and ran the business the way he did. Right. And so, look, I think every business is a vehicle for like really good things. And I think this is like a good checkpoint for me, but for every business owner, franchisor, like really think about it. Cause now, you got to worry about when I've outgrown that shell and I don't know it. Right. That's the thing that scares me.
All right. Three things. One, for the record, I do not want you to set up a trade show booth at my funeral. So let's just be on the same page there.
All right.
Because I will haunt you from the grave if you do that. So that's one. Two, you're thinking about it now.
Right.
Two moments happened when that I think about when Kobe Bryant died. One, I asked my wife, I said, all right, we die in 5 years. What do we want to do? And we both said at the same time, move to Florida. Now we got close. We moved to Atlanta. But we're like, we're done with Chicago at this point in our life. We want to try something different. And so and the question at that point, that was February 2020. The question at that point was, why are we staying in a place that we don't want to be anymore? That we're done with that chapter. And so it accelerated that decision. So we went and regrew the shell and made a change in our lives, a fairly drastic one. The other thing out of Kobe Bryant, and I've discussed this with some other leaders, I'm like, if you could ask Kobe Bryant, give Kobe the day before he dies in that helicopter crash with his daughter, the day before, you say, Kobe, you can give it all up. You can take your success down a level where you can't afford a private helicopter. You're not the greatest athlete or among the greatest athletes of all time. You didn't hustle and you had different priorities. You could still have been a professional basketball player, but not at the level you were at. Would you trade it in? And, I think he would for one more moment with his family. I bet you he would. And so it puts a value on what is true success and what is the metric for one more day in this world. The last thing is, I really put this topic on top, yes, to get your brains thinking, but next time you're at a franchise conference and Charles and I are there, we actually put this in here so that you'll say, I'm going to buy you a lobster. And so that's the new thing. Like anytime we see you out in public, you're going to buy us lobsters.
You know what? And hopefully it's at friend camp.
And that was a good idea.
I got to shorten that. That's it. So I do think, Charles, what you just said is very important. I think most of us don't, like, our blind side is that we don't know when it's time to go shed our shell and build a new one. But if you listen to the indicators, conversation like this, maybe there's an insight, but you listen to the indicators around you, you will probably find a pathway to figuring out when is it time to regrow your lobster shell.
And embrace it.
And embrace it.
As a positive.
That's it. That's FRANX. This is Deep Thoughts with Nick. See you later, guys.